Let's start the introductions with Mary Adams.
Serve on the city school board.
John Lane, 19th Ward, the schools committee.
Tim Macaluso with City Newspaper.
I'm Jen with the library.
And John Boutte, I'm chair of the Southwest Common Council and live in the neighborhood here on Melrose.
Corey McMichael, I'm a teacher at School 44.
Tamara Show, instructor, wellness coach at Southwest YMCA.
Sandy Show, high school senior at Leadership Academy for Young Men.
And Dean Cho, former 19th Ward resident, spent a lot of time with various meetings with Don.
Sorry.
Okay.
And I think I saw Bill getting in here.
Hey.
Have a seat, Bill.
Hey.
We were just going around with introductions, Bill. We were just doing introductions, if you can.
I'll just give my name. Oh,
Yeah.
Bill. I live in
Look me
the
up in the D. Look you up in the DNC. Look you up in the DNC.
You'll look me up in the DNC?
Yeah, for your picture the other day.
Yes.
Oh, that's an old picture that, yeah. So I'm Bill. I live in the area, so I don't know what else there is. I have volunteered in the music programs of School 22, School 19, and I helped out for a while at School 44. I haven't done anything this year yet, but I will commence. So.
Right. Thank you. Well, hopefully Liz will be here soon. I hear somebody at the door, and it is Liz.
Oh.
So that's perfect timing. Hello, how you doing?
Good.
Here's the agenda.
Great.
I only made 12 copies this time because I said we hopefully will run out because I always make twice as many as I should. We just went around and did introductions. If you'd like to introduce yourself. And
Sure. I'm Liz Hallmark. Happy to be here. I see a lot of folks here from the committee, actually,
yes,
the task force
yeah.
on the school board. And I can be here in about an hour, so I hope I can.
Yeah, well, we've got you next on the agenda.
Okay.
If you want to talk a bit about what you want to cover, you can either, you had a presentation, you said you want to do the PowerPoint?
Sure, I could do that, but you could, don't let me interrupt.
No, we've got it up first thing on the agenda. For those of you who haven't been here recently or haven't heard about it, Liz had started a task force back in April, was it? Something like that. And had invited half a dozen people that she knew to get involved with it. And then she asked that we get more people involved, so I tried to get some parents and people who had been involved with this committee over the years. So we ended up having about 15, 16 people that were involved with the committee at various times. We've got 4 that can't make it today that I know of. Paul Conroe sent a note saying he was tied up with something. Robin Detman, Beverly Usher, and Eleanor Coleman, who's normally our secretary here. She's she's tied up with a Prosper Rochester event. So we do have John Lang, who's on that committee, and Jennifer Lenio, and myself, and Tamara and John Shove have been involved. Dean Shove have been involved with it. And we should have gotten this young man involved also, because we need students on that committee too. But anyways, the committee started in April thereabouts, and it ended up running about every weekly from there till September, October.
Bi-weekly for a while.
Pardon?
That was bi-weekly for a while.
Yeah, it was bi-weekly 2 or 3 times, but it was a long trudge, and we ended up putting together a PowerPoint as a result of all the, we went through a ton of documentation. We had people from the district come in and answer questions on various topics. And I think that most of the folks on the committee were interested in trying to get more to neighborhood schools and leave the ability to have choice for schools that really have something to offer that's different. The big drawback that we saw was the fact that a lot of the choice taking place was pick a school that your child can take a bus to, rather than pick a school that really is going to be better. So that, a lot of people talked about how that was a problem. So I think we're probably ready over there. Looks like Liz has got her stuff together.
I'm not a PC user, so I'm a little confused about how to start the slideshow. Can somebody help me? I know there's something on right here. So while we're figuring it out, I could just say a few words about it. So the way the board works is that really our job is to make policy, and then it's the superintendent's job to carry it out. So the policy that is in place right now was created like 15 years ago. And we used to have neighborhood schools, and then we moved about 15 years ago to something called managed choice. And the idea behind that was there was a sense that, especially during No Child Left Behind, George Bush's time in office, there was a sense that if there are failing schools, families need to be given more choices. So they shouldn't be necessarily trapped in a failing school. And so the idea was to broaden the options, to broaden the choices, so that families wouldn't be stuck, that's the language, in a failing school. And so managed choice switched us from neighborhood schools, where if you had a certain address, there was a school you were going to go to that, or in a certain area, to changing the district to 3 zones. And so the idea of the 3 zones was that instead of being at your area school according to your address, you had a broader area that you could choose from. So you would be in the South Zone, so you had a lot more schools that you could choose from in the South Zone. So you go from 1 or 2 schools to, a lot more than that. According to the policy, folks were supposed to kind of stay within their zone. You had more schools to choose from, but not the whole city. Through practice, however, because of the way it was carried out and because of budget issues, people wound up sort of crossing zone boundaries. And so where we wound up is students all over the city, very, very far from their home. And what's compounded that was that transportation reimbursement from the state only comes for 1.5 miles plus, so that we're only reimbursed for 1.5 miles. And so if people wanted to attend a school that was closer than 1.5 miles, they have to walk, their kids have to walk to school. So that has driven many families to choose schools further away because they want the transportation. So, is this going to get on?
Well, I'm trying to hook up to the internet.
Okay. All right. So anyway, what we did, and this was kind of a process for me because I'm the newest board member, and I didn't really understand the policy. I didn't understand the history of it. And so I wanted to really understand how it came to be and what all the pieces of the policy were. So I launched a task force back in April. We worked for 6 months. And so I can do Google Drive. We worked for 6 months really to understand the policy. And after 6 months of a lot of investing, if I can pop on, I'm also doing this here. Here we go. Sorry, hang on a second. Okay. So the task force investigated the history and the reasons why we had the policy and what all the thinking was. We looked at a lot of data. And really that was for to get community input about what were the issues in the community, what were people feeling, and for me personally, why did it come to be? What is this about? Now at this point, now that we've spent 6 months working on it, the next stage is to move it toward the superintendent, because the superintendent also has to take a look at it and say, well, you can't just make up policy and you didn't think about this X, Y, and Z. So we can't just say, do this to the superintendent. She has to study it for a while and then come back with her recommendations. So there's still a negotiation, a discussion process that's going to take place. So I presented this. I presented the findings of the task force to the superintendent's cabinet on the 14th of December, and everybody was there, and they were, it was a good reception. People were really interested in it. And it stimulated a lot of discussion. And so from there, the next step is the board has to charge the superintendent formally to please put it in her next 100-day plan. And then she'll agree to study it for about 6 months. And then, so it kind of gets into the pipeline that way. So this is not a quick process. And then of course there's timing, if it takes her 6 months, and then we go back and change the policy. And then there's time for the placement process in next year. So it could be a little while before it gets working, but I'm happy to say that the first stage has been completed. We've presented it to the cabinet. I'm hoping that she'll study it thoroughly for 6 months, and then the board will have another discussion about what's the best way to change the policy so that we can implement it into operations in a way that will work well for everybody. And we also want to present it to other people who haven't heard the discussion around it, so I'm happy to be able to do that here. And it's still not very big. I don't know how to maximize this. Oh, present. That looks hopeful. Let's see what that does.
It's not present.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so let's just go through it, and I'll try to make this quick. So this is just presenting the overview so you understand what's going on. In the early 2000s, the district created managed choice policy, and we changed from neighborhood schools to these zones. The policy was intended to create better equity, give families more choices, set up a fair selection process. We established a lottery, and to give timely information to parents. And we were also supposed to continually monitor and improve the stuff that was going on in each of the zones. We created Northwest, Northeast, and South zones in the city. And then we had a lottery formula. And there were 3 registration centers, 1 in each zone originally. Later that became centralized downtown when there were budget issues. There were some special schools that already existed, the citywides, where they had special programming like School Yards or School 15. Some of the schools that had particular special programming, they were kind of grandparented in. It's kind of a separate lottery process. So one thing I just mentioned before, the state funding only reimburses busing for students living beyond 1.5 miles from their school. Therefore, families who want transportation tend to pick schools that are further away from their home. We didn't anticipate this, I don't think. Then there's been uneven access to special education and English language learning services. So that, say, if you're in zone Northeast and maybe the schools in the Northeast don't have those particular services, so we wound up sending kids across zones to have access for these services. So the boundaries didn't stay very distinct as they were intended to be when the policy was first set up. And then the third complication is that only 50% of families have ever participated in the lottery. And that's, I think, because there's a level of complexity. People don't quite understand it. It's certainly more complex than it used to be when you just knew what school you went to because your school was close to your address. But the level of complexity has led some families to feel disenfranchised and to give up on the district. And I would also argue that due to the fact that we didn't continue to have registration zones in each section, and parents are confused about it, it's an example that the implementation of the managed choice is an example of institutionalized racism, because the families that can figure it out easily enough are the ones who participate in the lottery, whereas the ones who aren't able to figure it out, they're the ones who don't, and they wind up getting placed. And so it's not really a choice for them, they get placed. So that's a problem. So here's an example of what's actually happened. Now this is not a current, actual, up-to-date thing, but this is an image that was pulled from some old facilities modernization data, I think a number of years ago. All of the red dots represent students where they live, and the blue area, no, that's blue over there, but that section. This is for school 16 in this area. The blue area was supposed to be the catchment area it would be ideal to have the students kind of in that area, but look at the red dots, that's where all the students live who are actually attending school 16. So you can see there's this scatter thing that's going on throughout the whole city, and of course that's very, very expensive. I can also point out that these are the three zones. Here's the south zone, the northwest, and the northeast. So according to policy, there could have been a scatter, but it should have been just scattered here, right? But not here. So the way it's been implemented has been really problematic and also expensive, because you can imagine all the transportation. What we would prefer to happen is to have, instead of something like on the left, and here I think we're looking at school 17, something closer to the right, where you have maybe not as it was originally, one address, one school, but maybe you have access to 2 or 3 schools closest to your address. But at any rate, it would be much closer, and so it would reverse that scatter plot. This is what the task force was suggesting. So here are the new managed choice policy goals. We want to implement the best aspects of the 15-year-old policy. I don't think folks are talking about getting rid of the policy entirely, and there are some good things about it. The registration centers, there was going to be continuous monitoring, limiting the choices so that we're not having these huge transportation costs. But we also need to create incentives and remove some obstacles so that families will want to choose their neighborhood schools. I would argue that the original mistake that was made, perhaps, was saying, okay, here's a school that people consider good, and here's a school that people consider not as good. Instead of moving people around, which causes all these transportation costs, a better thing would be to move resources around, not people. Because the secondary problems when you start to attend schools that are far away from your home is that you don't have a community. There's not this, the school stops being the hub of the community, and that contributes to the breakdown of neighborhoods. I heard the mayor talking about how when families are not walking to school, kids are not walking to school, and there's a lot of sort of abandonment of the neighborhood, that gives space, opens up for drug dealers to move in. So there's something really important about owning your neighborhood and supporting the community locally. And yet, we don't want to sort of pin people in. So we're trying to look for this halfway place where we don't sort of have people all over the city, but maybe not just one choice, several choices. There was a lot of discussion in the task force about families' worries about safety. If you live in a neighborhood that's unsafe, you don't want to walk to school. So how do we deal with that reimbursement problem from the state? We really need to focus on that. And maybe we establish more supports. And so here's the recommendations. We'd like to offer busing for less than 1.5 miles. So here's an example of us saying, oh, let's do it. Superintendent, go ahead and do it. But she can't do it unless the money's there, right? So we're saying this is what we'd like to see happen, and then she's going to have to study and come back to us and say, well, if we lobby with the state or do this or that, maybe we can accomplish this. So this is not set in stone. These are just our recommendations, and she's going to take it from here. But we'd like for busing to be offered for less than 1.5 miles. We'd like to create safe walking routes with more crossing guards, walkie-talkies, coordinate better with the city so that there's a partnership with the city, making neighborhoods feel safer and schools be more attractive to families. We want to increase the parent participation in school. Of course, we always have an issue with parent engagement. It's hard to be engaged with your child's school if it's halfway across the city. So we think bringing families back closer to neighborhood schools will help with some of our parent engagement issues. And we want to build better partnerships between schools and nearby organizations, churches, rec centers, city services in order to strengthen neighborhoods. So we really want to focus on partnerships with the city and coordination with the city. I think this policy has disconnected us from the city, unintentionally, but in that conversation where I presented it on the 14th to the cabinet, folks did say, I think the superintendent said, yeah, a lot of cities took this route. A lot of cities started offering more schools and lotteries. And there is kind of a trend maybe heading back in the other direction now, but we should really study other cities and see what, new secondary issues are arising. So there's a lot of analysis that still needs to happen, as they take a look at these recommendations. We'd also recommend that we reestablish parent information registration in each zone. And we can be creative. This is 15 years later. There's computers, libraries, rec centers, schools. I'm sure we can do it differently. I'm sure the zones information centers were cut because of budget concerns or centralized. But we need to revisit that so that we're not, continuing a system that's so complicated that half of these families are not participating in it. We need to simplify the process by creating street maps where every address has a guaranteed neighborhood school seat if they register between September through April. And a suggestion is to limit choice to the closest 3 schools and citywides. And more recommendations. We need to review and rebalance the special education and English language learning services in each zone and how that's done. I know that the superintendent is really taking a look at special ed right now and doing a lot of changes. So it seems like there could be a lot of alignment here. We definitely need to conduct regular analysis to adjust equitable resources among school addresses. The pre-K is a new wrinkle that was added. The policy was written before we had universal EPK and UPK, so the policy doesn't even address pre-K. And the way that our previous superintendent implemented this policy, well, there was no policy for pre-K. With the desire to encourage as many families to enroll their young ones, they allowed parents to enroll pre-K anywhere in the city. Like, it's only half a day, so if you want to pick a school that's closer to your work so it's more convenient, we'll let you do that. So the pre-K is a whole other layer of families in different places. So we need to address that in the policy, and we need to figure out what we want to do about that. And there's a difference of opinion, I think, among folks on the board about letting parents enroll their pre-K anywhere in the city, and are we going to move back to neighborhood schools and sort of bring things together? We still have to do a lot of debate about that. And then, of course, we wouldn't just change it when we're ready to change the policy. The implementation, we begin it with a phase-in plan with the youngest family, so it would move through gradually. So the next step is to charge the superintendent to create some recommendations after she studied it, and I'd like to do more of this, present it and see if people say, that sounds right, or no, I really don't like that. Did you think of this? I think it's still important to be gathering community feedback about this, because we may have, I'm sure we did miss some stuff. So it's kind of a tricky process because I'm not promising it, because it's not, it's not, the policy has not been changed, the superintendent hasn't put in her input yet, but we want to say what we've discussed so far and get further input from the community. And then we'll send the recommendations after she's given her input after analysis. We'll send it back to the policy committee, and then it'll be formally revised to new policy, and then implementation will happen. So it's not going to be for a while, but it's in the pipeline, and this is the process. And this is the hope when families focus on improving their neighborhood school, improving every school in Rochester as possible.
So right now you're looking at having the superintendent is going to take how long to review this?
She wanted at least 6 months to study it. She would be comparing other cities, other districts, really understand the nuts and bolts, because that's her job. She does the implementation, we just do the policy, but we have to make sure our policy is implemented with the budget, and she's really thought through any wrinkles that we might not have thought of with the policy. So she needs 6 months. I hope that can happen soon, but then there's a lot of other stuff on her plate, so I'm not sure that the board, I presented to the cabinet, but the board has not formally said start in January.
You reviewed this with the board? I know we reviewed it when the meeting where Mary was at.
I invited the board to the presentation with the cabinet, and I did a presentation to the board, was invited. I believe Mary and Van and Malik have seen this presentation. Cynthia, Willow was part of the group, so Cynthia has not seen it, Jose has not seen it. So the majority of the board has seen it, but I'm concerned that Cynthia and Jose have not seen it yet.
Okay.
Liz, what's the cabinet?
That's the superintendent's
Staff?
Yeah, like the deputies, the
Deputies.
immediate, her direct reports. So like the deputy superintendent for teaching and learning, and other like high-level direct people who report directly to her. The
the
chiefs.
operations, people who do transportation, curriculum instruction.
Oh,
We have
I
all
see.
these pieces that she has to kind of figure out, that way beyond my pay grade here.
When did we figure out? I think he said it's 15,000 students a day are transported.
Is that what he said?
I think it was.
It would be.
I think that's what he said.
Sounds
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
Something like that. That's a lot of
It's a lot.
delivery.
It's a lot. And then we're also doing transportation for the charter schools too. There's layers and layers and layers. Right?
What has happened so far as getting this presentation to parents?
I have not, because I didn't, there was a sense from the board that we should first present it to the superintendent. And I wanted to make sure the board had seen it, because I wouldn't want to sort of jump over. I mean, the board really needs to say, yeah, this feels about right. Okay, go ahead and start collecting. If I just started sharing it, then that would be acting as if, I had the board's approval, and I'm not sure.
But I thought that this presentation originally was intended to be used for focus groups to get additional parent input.
Yes, and it can be. I think it works really well for focus groups, and I think it really could. I just internally, I would like to share it with Cynthia and Jose
Mhm.
to make sure that they feel okay, because otherwise it feels like I'm trying to sort of force something. I mean, I feel really strongly about full board discussion about a potential movement on something as important as this policy. So I'm a little bit reluctant to do the focus groups first before I've shown it to Jose and Cynthia. And I will invite them again or meet with them one-on-one if I can't do that. So, but that's my work. I'm going to be talking with those two board members and see if we can get it on the superintendent's next 100-day plan. And I haven't had a conversation with her about what's your dance card? What's your next dance card? I don't know if she has room to put this in because she's got a lot of other stuff. It might have to be the next 6 months, or maybe she does. I don't know. That's a conversation I need to have with her. I'm waiting to meet with her. So I have a couple of sort of one-on-one meetings that are in front of me before I can promise to the public when this is going to start being studied by her.
Thing
It
that
will be. It's just I can't tell you when.
thing that concerns me is I know at the last two meetings with the superintendent I was at, she had an afternoon coffee and conversation type meeting there, and then she did one at 44, and in both cases, Eileen Graham mentioned that she'd like to see more parent involvement in a lot of the decision making. And we tried to get a lot of parents, and we did get, current parents or past parents, but we always would like to get more input. And, I thought that the objective of this presentation was to reach out in focus groups and not necessarily say this is what's going to happen, but here's one possibility, what's your input, so that as...
And that will. I'm as soon as I get Jose and Cynthia to see you and get their comments, and I think then I would be comfortable, grabbing some folks from the Managed Choice Task Force and lining up some presentations at libraries and rec centers and churches, and because this is just our first stab at it, and I think that we could get a lot more media into it, and I think that would be useful to continue to shape this alongside the superintendent when she's doing her work as well. This is not cut and dry here. There's a lot of work that still needs to happen here.
Yeah, when we think back on all the stuff we covered during those 6 months of weekly meetings, we did a lot of stuff that Ralph Spezio had input to on, the community accredited school model, and a lot of things that don't make it at all into this, that somehow it would be nice to capture some of that information.
That's my intention, is to share this with a wider audience. I just want to do it in the right order.
Mm-hmm.
Did I have, yeah.
Could you tell us the consensus of the other people that have seen it so far?
The board members?
Yes.
Well, Mary, you might say what you thought. Van, I can speak. Van was at the presentation on the 14th, and he seemed supportive of it. The cabinet members were saying this is a very timely discussion. It feels like this is something we really need to work on. I saw a lot of nodding in the audience, like people were felt it was an important topic and that we were pointing out some important problems with the policy and that it definitely needed to be worked on. I didn't see resistance. Van seemed supportive of it. I think Will is supportive of it. She's been working with us on the task force. I don't see resistance. I just see that it's going to take some time to do. That's all. And we still need to continue the conversation.
So I'm a strong advocate of neighborhood community schools, and so some of the things that were mentioned as the benefits, that's where I come from. I come from a place of community control for education, and so I definitely support neighborhood community schools. I do have a concern that that a change could be made, and even if it is phased in, that I know how it goes. I know that there are schools that close and families don't even know, even though it's been widely disseminated, that a school is about to close and people don't know. So I'm very concerned that there could be a change in policy in the way that many people are accustomed to operating in terms of getting their kids or their grandchildren or their nieces and nephews placed, would all of a sudden become, aware of a whole new process that they didn't know was coming. So I think it's really important to do extremely broad and detailed focus groups and getting feedback before we just announce it. And I don't think it's too soon to do that. I mean, I understand like time-wise, your commitments and things like that, but I don't think it's a problem to have conversations with as many groups and parents as possible at any point in time, from when you all were meeting as a task force to now, to when the superintendent begins to give reflection. I don't think it's ever too soon to have conversations with parents and community people to get more, it's a moving, as you said, it's a work in progress. And the more informed it can be from that feedback, the better. There was one other thing I wanted to say. Oh, I think that you had a resolution drafted to bring to the board, which I appreciate, to set the ball rolling. So I would hope that that goes through in January, and that not only does it charge the superintendent with a timeline, but also you might want to be explicit about, frame some words, develop some wording around ongoing community input to let the board know that we're continuing to do that and encourage.
Okay, so change that in the resolution.
Yeah, try to get us as a board to commit to fostering a community dialogue about this as the process develops, so that then we can have Vice President Elliott present at Baden Street if she would be willing to do so.
Right.
If we all agree and support the resolution, then it kind of, it sets us a little bit more formally involved.
And I think the parents will be more receptive, not only them, if they're given the opportunity in advance to.
Right.
Yeah, that's really important. I mean, the whole thing came up. I mean, when I was running for board, I ran twice. I didn't win the first time, and then I won the second time. But it seemed to me that the most consistent thing that people wanted when I attended the door-to-door conversations or community forums, most consistent, I heard people say, we want neighborhood schools, we want neighborhood schools. So when I got on the board, I thought, hey, low-hanging fruit. Why don't I work on an issue that I hear most people seem to be asking for? Shouldn't that be an easy first thing to work on? Consequently, I realized, transportation, operations, special education, it's so complicated. But, nevertheless, that's why I wanted to do this task force. But I agree. I think that's a good idea. I'll feel empowered to go out and start doing focus groups. One conversation we had at one of the last task force meetings that we had, somebody pointed out that when you start to do focus groups, you may not know all of the neighborhood groups and the churches and the organizations that are out there, so you can wind up sort of upsetting these people who you didn't meet with. So it's better to coordinate with almost sort of a top-down approach, like if I could reach the neighborhood coordination people and get it advertised sort of in the sections of the city, the 4 quadrants of the city, so that it hits all of the groups, and so everybody feels like they have an opportunity. Otherwise, it's just the groups I happen to know, and that can wind up making people feel left out. So I want to do it the right way, so everybody feels invited. So I can. Yeah.
I wondered if you could ask, you mentioned about the regular monitoring, and I wondered in your research and as you were preparing it, if you understood why, whether the regular monitoring took place, and if that means that it was understood that this was happening, but for some reason it didn't get implemented the way it was supposed to, or if it really wasn't monitored. Because if you change the policy again and nobody's monitoring it, it would seem like it would have a tendency of its own to go back to the way it is now.
So that's a perfect example. Thank you for pointing that out. So we make policy and the superintendent implements it. And so if it wasn't implemented, either the former superintendents tried and failed or ignored or didn't do that. So part of the current superintendent's job would be to say, okay, here's this piece in the policy. We're supposed to be having these improvement committees that meet on an annual basis or in a certain set of way. And it's her job to figure out how that can happen. And if it's not happening, it's the board's responsibility to say, hey, why isn't this being implemented? This is in the policy. So it's on both of us. You know, she needs to give us feedback saying this can be done, or it can be done with a few changes. And so that's why we have that conversation when she comes back to us about finalizing the policy, but then we need to monitor it. So I'm new to the board. I don't know why it didn't happen. Perhaps when she does her study of it, she can find out, you know, were there some obstacles that prevented it, or did former superintendents just ignore it? Like, why didn't it happen? I don't know that.
The other question I have is, when you talk about the safety almost driving the program in a way for many of the parents, is it because parents really are experiencing safety issues at home, or is it, I mean, we have this struggle in the city about perception about safety, and, you know, people think, oh my God, you know, I can't go down to the, you know, I can't go downtown because it's going to be this or that. And, you know, so much of it is just in the outer limits kind of thing, because it's not unsafe. And so I'm wondering why parents think it's unsafe, or is it because they're fearful of student fighting or something like that?
I think there's a traffic issue, and when
Well, it
there's
could be
snow
traffic,
piled up
it
on the
could be
corner.
Oh, I
drugs.
got you, okay,
It
okay.
could be violence, it could be just perception, it's off base even, right? Or it could be, I don't have any neighbors who are going to this school, so I feel all alone. So that goes back to the incentives. How can we incentivize groups of folks in one area to go to that school together? You know, there might be some buddy systems for placement enrollment that we could.
But a mile and a half is roughly from here to the district office.
But I think we
It's
talked about during
unreasonable.
some of the task force meetings, it's getting everyone on the same page in terms of perception of what's a good school, what's a bad school, and how do we all come from the same point? Because your perception of something may not be the same as mine. And how we get even, the suburbs don't deal with what we deal with in the city. Again, it's perceptions of this drives a lot of things. So it could be education and putting out the right information to the right people so they can make those decisions more easily.
I wanted to respond to the monitoring question. So, I mean, there's a couple of key areas for monitoring. One is where the catchment and zones are drawn. You know, like, do they need to be rebalanced based on population changes and school capacity? So that's one area that I don't think that it was monitored historically, because you just see the scatter plots and you see, you know, I just don't think there was attention to that. But the other probably more relevant or more important part of monitoring is Commissioner Powell always talk about how the idea was that not just special education and English language learner services being balanced, but also if there's a key school like that is desirable, like for example School 15 or World of Inquiry, that is, you know, highly sought after and there's never enough slots, then that school, the obligation was to replicate into each zone a school replicating those desirable traits. So that didn't happen. But what I want to say is that I think there's a counter current that was going on, which is all this accountability stuff from the federal No Child Left Behind and its iterations, you know, over the years. And then also the State Department of Education and the way they implemented the accountability systems that were really perverse, where we would get failure would generate dollars, right? So if you were a failing school according to the state accountability systems of mainly test scores, standardized test scores, then you would be eligible for an infusion of dollars. And so that was, and so to me what would be a much more powerful engine for improvement is strong community neighborhood schools where you have this support and investment and engagement. That's where you will see students thrive academically and otherwise, and you'll see the neighborhoods thrive. So if in the absence of that, in the absence of a strong community, you know, nurturing, powerful environment where you have parents who have the same level of demanding expectations as they have in the suburbs and all of these other good things that can support student achievement, in the absence of that, you have this kind of, you know, sad, accountability-driven system. So it's kind of like we don't have the opportunity to see how the improvement engine could drive with a neighborhood school. So in the absence of that, you have the state mandates, like this school's failing this year, this, set of 6 schools is eligible for a school improvement grant. So then they go after those dollars, and that's where the focus, I think, of the administrative energy has been. And it's not really necessarily their fault, but it's up to us as parents and community members to insist on a different paradigm where we're driving those demands from our school community level.
How do you plan for, this is the thing that strikes me, especially when you're looking at facilities modernization, which is sort of indirectly related to this.
It is.
I remember going way back when in the Josh Lofton building, they had, in quotes, like a war room. This is like about 10 years ago, where they started the planning for FMP. And most of the schools were going to be, well, not most of the schools, but a large portion of schools were going to be on the southeast side of the city. And by the time 5 years passed, most of the students were in the northeast section of the city. So, I mean, how do you...
And southwest.
And southwest. And how do you predict that? How do you plan for that?
That's the superintendent.
Because I mean, there's no children anymore in Park Avenue. I mean, there are children there, but it's not like it was when they were first doing this plan.
I know she wanted to speak before, but I'll just say the FMP too has a whole bunch of data, and we can talk more.
A lot more rental properties are on the southeast side of the city, and a lot of people are renting, not owning. So I think rental properties drive what side they're going to be on. I mean, that just makes some sense. And I'm worried about the fact that people who are leaving Western New York, and especially Rochester, because they're going, I'm tired of this. This is a good reason for us to leave the school system. I'm just going to take everything, or, you know what? I'll put them in this school, but I'll work in Rochester, but I'm not going to put them in the city. I'll put them somewhere else. Then that loses the money and the neighborhood and the community and the growth in the community. So it's like, I would love to give the superintendent time, but we're losing people too. So she definitely has to be on that crunch too, because we're losing families too as well. And I think it has to do with rental property. Because a lot of people are not owning, they're renting from here to here to here. I'm going to stay a year here. I'm going to stay a year here. No, I like this place. I'm going to stay. A lot of families are just renting. They're not living in homes anymore.
Well, I know that Ralph, he was on the task force with us, and he mentioned that when he was the principal of 17, he had partnerships with the city and housing authorities, and he knew the families in his catchment area, and if they were renting or they had to leave a place, he could find out other properties that were in that area and suggest and support families staying in that area.
Right.
So if we don't have that partnership with the city, so that's the kind of level of partnership that we need to be, we just can't function.
But that's why they're running across all around the different zones. They're going from this, and that's why it's like, why were they here and now they're here?
But
that's
if the
why.
principals, at least, of the schools, or the district somehow was coordinating the housing and rental properties, I
Right.
think there are some possibilities for retaining folks around neighborhood schools, I think. But we got to work on it specifically. It's not just going to happen.
Even like people like Ralph Spezio, who was at the top of that
Right.
of that little pyramid, who really cared about everything about him, about what happened with the kids in the schools, and everyone did a buy-in. They all had a piece of that, and they spread it out to the people, the neighbors, and they all brought in, because Ralph would do exceptional things. But the principal of the school and the vice principal, how their attitudes and how they train and how they teach, and the people under them do that, makes a difference. It comes down to the community. And it's hard getting everyone on that same page there.
And just looking at all the layers of issues going on, I know that one of the pieces that Barbara's working on is, trying to improve the leadership in the schools. So we have stronger leaders, and there needs to be a lot more training there, and better leadership from the chiefs and the folks who are above them. So there's all this talk of like the bench is too narrow. We need more, better leaders in all of our buildings. So that's just another layer.
Again,
and I know she's definitely
that comes
working on
back
it.
to a common process where it can maybe not duplicate, but it can get close. It has to be that way. If you're doing a continuous process, you have to assess, verify that it worked, and then do it. Like you're saying, she's 100 days, assess what you got. Let's try and verify what happened. Is it going to work? We'll do it. But while you've just done it, you have to start the next assessment.
Yeah, and I
when it's
know
already
that
done.
personally, I know all the stuff she's trying to work on, and I would love her to put this first in her line, because I think the neighborhood schools would be an awesome thing to do. But I'm also aware that there's a million other things that she has to work on as well, and I want to hang on to the superintendent. I want us to have clear communication between the board and the superintendent. I want her to understand what our priorities are. I want us to understand what she's capable of accomplishing within the amount of time, So it's just about clear and open communication. And so I'm trying to be respectful, but kind of keeping it on her plate, so there's this funny little dance you do.
Can I ask our student? I forgot your name, I'm sorry.
Sanj.
What is it?
Sanj.
Okay. Have you been in Rochester all your school life?
Most of my middle school and high school life.
Okay.
Yeah.
So elementary is where where we're really focusing on the desire for neighborhood schools. So I was just wondering if you or maybe your friends, what do you think about it? Do you have any experience with elementary schools or family members? What drives the adult that's deciding, the parent or grandparent or whatever?
I think it's more the parent deciding, and they more decide on the reputation that school has, what level of education that the teachers have, what are they usually take tours or ask people what is the overall scene because they want to make sure it has good conditions and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Basically that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's what I did as a mom.
I think for us, when we were living in North Carolina, the school system was not such that we wanted our son to go into it. And we were homeschooling for 5 years. And when we moved back to Rochester, they even made us complete homeschooling for 4th grade and continue into RCSD. But it was different. Because we did all the things, we did standardized testing, except we did, I can't remember the Iowa testing versus the cats.
Mm-hmm.
Accomplished the same thing. But there was a lot of attention to, even for him, he's got a different learning style. His mom teaches a different style, depending on what works for him.
Mm-hmm.
And coming back here and running a syllabus for Rochester and satisfying them, when you come back, it's like, I'm going to do this for 4 or 5 months. And give us a syllabus. More work. And you try and match up with what their desires are, and you teach that to the best of your ability. But even the way things are now with the schooling system, I don't know, that would be very difficult, I think. Because sometimes I feel like you're training to pass a standardized test versus teaching the information, the data that is pertinent to that child and who eventually grows up and can give it down to theirs when they have their own too, and what's important. It's hard.
Right.
I think they should teach more about the curriculum itself. I mean, don't get me wrong, the test is fine, but understanding the subject is even, to me, I think more beneficial. And for the kid to like what they're doing. Not to think about taking a test, or I'm going to take the test, I'm going to practice. And then they realize, wait a minute, I just don't like this. And kids have anxiety about tests all the time, so taking it over and over again, a test that you're going to practice again and again, I mean, how much anxiety comes from that, from just teaching the curriculum? Where you could have fun and learn fun things and learn new things and new techniques and, maybe you might be able to do something or teach someone else something, but you can't do that if you keep practicing for this test all the time.
Emotionless way of teaching, because kids that get excited, if the teacher's excited about something, it'll trickle down and get to the kids too. Mm-hmm. They'll do the buying on their own.
One of the things that is somewhat related was you put in a resolution, Mary, for getting facilities evaluation, which if we're going to have if 44 stays open is going to be something that will be necessary to convince somebody to do that. Do you want to say a couple of words on that? Because that having a good idea of what is going on in terms of needs in the city school district is something that's necessary for deciding what schools to leave open, and that has a big impact on being able to choose neighborhood schools, because if you close all your neighborhood schools, it's there's not that choice anymore.
Sure. So the resolution really, in some ways, is pretty simple and like really just iterating what should be a fundamental operational duty of the administration to continually assess physical space, look at enrollment data, projections, that data that you were asking about, Tim. Look at projection data, look at changing programs like having 3-year-old pre-K, looking at what the state of the art or the expectations, what our local standards are for providing specialized services, all of those things, having a continual assessment and set of recommendations. Surprised in the community meeting where she desired to have a board, a sense that the full board would want such a process in play. But I felt it was important, since she did want that, to make sure that is prioritized, because it's essential. And not only, it's fundamental operations, but it also is in everyone's interest to have parents and families have knowledge of what to expect in terms of school programs, and if something's going to close or move to a different location, families have a right to know ahead of time and to be involved in that decision making. So it's just basically putting that in play, and of course it is relevant to School 44. But it's also relevant to schools across the district. And in my research, I'm embarrassed to say that School 41 and School 43 are actually listed in that document for eventual closure as well, which has never been put on the public record for dialogue, but it was in the documents that there is a plan for those buildings to close. So it's ridiculous, because we all know that Northwest is clearly lacking in adequate capacity for their students. So to close 2 perfectly good buildings in that zone is just ludicrous. So I don't know why it's on there, but we need to address it, and we need to have a process that looks at these crazy things so they don't come up 6 months before some decision is put in play.
Yeah, from what you know, what's the certainly the 1.5 mile busing issue, which Albany has been dragging its feet about changing, is one of the things that is really making it easy for the school to move kids all over creation and close buildings, as it seems most economically desirable from the standpoint of managing space. But is there some reason they've been dragging their feet so much, and that some of our assembly members and senators haven't been pushing more for it?
So there's been legislation introduced to allow the State Department of Education to reimburse the district for busing kids to their neighborhood schools, so like less than 1.5 miles. Whether it's anything greater than 1/2 mile away from school would then be reimbursed, or whether it would be any transportation to a neighborhood school or to any school would be reimbursed based on the grounds of safety hazards, mainly would be the argument. So maybe 4 or 5 years ago it passed the Assembly, but not the Senate. It lost in the Senate by like 1 vote, a piece of legislation to make this happen. And then 1.5 years or 2 years later, it was passed in the Senate, but not the Assembly. And then most recently, it is not. It was not supported in either chamber, and we were reduced to arguing for a pilot program, maybe like for just School 17, for example. And even that did not come through. So it's discouraging. I don't know why we don't have the support. Who knows the irrational things that go on politically in Albany. There might be some concern about precedent setting, having the state education department reimburse all the big cities or, other places where an argument could be made. So that might be part of their resistance. But there's also, I believe, some probably just political stuff that I would never have access to knowing about.
So one of the things the superintendent could do, for instance, in studying this issue would be to say, well, we might say something if we bust.
That we have the studies.
So we have
we have the studies that give varying assumptions or some name for this kind of analysis that engineers know. I don't know. Where, if you reduce the total distance by X, then it breaks even. If you reduce it by, this much, then it's Y, so there's a spread of savings or breaking even arguments that exist from an analysis that was done like 4 or 5 years ago.
Is that the Alvis report?
And no, this was Jose Cruz. This was transportation, focused on transportation. So it was done by the administration under Dr. Vargas.
Okay.
Early on was administration.
Has anything been done to try to get the mayor on board for that?
Transportation?
Yeah.
Well, just in general
politically,
interactions with Albany. I mean, you've got two warring parties in the Democratic Party, and how do you bridge that? And how do you get everybody sort of going in the same direction, who's talking to each other?
Yeah,
Otherwise, that's a big elephant that's sitting on the table that you just ignore.
Yeah, it would be, I think if we had her, fighting for this, it would be helpful in getting more visibility for it, and I think she's got a lot of good reasons to be, because I think strengthening neighborhood schools strengthens neighborhoods.
Right.
And that would be definitely in her interest.
Yeah, I believe strongly we really need to strengthen our partnership with the city in a lot of different ways. It benefits both of us, and for us to, work separately, it's to the detriment of both. So, if we could plan co-lobbying, if we could, make arguments, that may be the next step. So yeah, we need to do focus groups with the public, but we also need to do some legislative convincing with city folks and Albany folks and representatives. There's a lot of different layers we need to move on here.
She's been an advocate of choice, though, a very strong advocate of choice.
She has, although I gave her the quote, because she said, when people are walking to their schools, it opens up vacancies
Right.
and holes, and then drug dealers move in. So, she's the one who said that, and I was like, yes. I got that from her. So I think she could probably see both sides of the argument, so it's a matter of how we somehow. But I would, I'd love to, I would like to present this to her and see.
She'd almost put her quote in the presentation.
I always share that quote whenever I present it, because it came straight from her.
Now, one of the things that has, I think both John and I have noticed, is getting parent involvement in some of the various events that we've tried to put on is sometimes challenging, because I don't know if there's as much interaction from parent involvement coordinators at some of the schools as would be desirable to have. Like the meeting we had at School 44 had a few parents there, but a lot of the few parents that were there were people we had contacted. The shows were there, but you would have liked to have seen 24 parents from School 44 there, and I think it was less than half a dozen probably.
Have you had the same parent liaison for a long time?
Yes, she's been there for as far as I can remember, yes.
And do you know what went out for that meeting?
There was a flyer that went out the week prior, that first Monday, and then there was another half sheet that went home the day of, reminding. I think part of it too, though, maybe with the last half-day flyer that went home, was the kids don't get off the bus until, some of them, almost 7 o'clock. And by the time that they receive the flyers, it's a little bit late.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, a lot of flyers never get received.
Exactly.
I don't think
Yeah.
That's a reality.
As far as
Robocalls,
mailings,
though.
I'm
Do they
not
do
sure.
robocalls? Do you know?
Yes,
Yeah,
there's
'cause
certain,
That's effective sometimes.
yeah.
We
As
get
far as-
robocalls from the city school district all the time for high school.
Mhm.
So that's effective. in that-
I get them
that
all the
perspective.
time for school time.
Yep.
So I don't know if there's anything that the district is looking at doing to try to strengthen that interaction,
Yes,
but I
it's a
think
huge priority.
it would be definitely desirable from what we've seen anyway. Okay. Were there any other questions relative the request for facilities assessment that Mary put through is, I've got a link to it on the sheet there. It went out in the notification that went out, so you've got a hot link there to see the full text of it, but she went over
It's
the
pretty
gist of it.
fundamental. It's
Yeah.
nothing radical.
No, it kind of struck me, and one of the things that got me at the meeting we had downtown with the superintendent, she mentioned that that it's a struggle getting the data that she needs, and most people who talk about central office, see it as there are so many people down there generating data that the last thing that you can imagine that somebody would be short of is data when they have questions. But it was one thing that during the task force meetings, sometimes, like I had sent out this sheet that shows the district, the catchment areas, feeder patterns for the Southwest, and we had one of the people there, name escapes me right now, who is involved in generating information, and they thought that came from something outside of the district. So it's hard sometimes, and I had gotten this out of a FMP document that had been sent out in 2012. So it is an issue. I think this is something that what you're asking for needs to generate is some real good, a map which shows you at a glance where are the kids coming from to go to that school, tells a lot about what school are we closing now, and you've got all the people in that catchment area that now have to be bused somewhere else. They haven't updated these feeder pattern maps for, I think this was probably from 2000 or sometime, in the 2000 something. And I guess the person who used to do that isn't there anymore, so it's kind of ironic that most parents or people who criticize central office, they see it as all these number crunchers, bean counters, and people generating all sorts of data, but then when you present something like this, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand was doing and who did that when. Oh well.
That's pretty common in a siloed organization.
Oh yeah.
And I'm optimistic that some of that kind of dysfunction is improving. Just tidbit, Mary's opinion.
Good.
You know, I'm optimistic that some of that, because there was some real, like, I used to get so frustrated about not being able to be given information as a board member that I would request, that I know exists, because people would be telling me, but I couldn't tell who told me that this exists, you know, like kind of crazy madness in terms of accessing information and control, like fear and control, and, you know, so I'm really optimistic that a lot of that is being straightened out, so.
Good.
Hopefully it will improve. And I do know there's current data that would be able to generate those maps in terms of the grids exist. Like we got it last year where it's in table format where, you know, where the students from school 10 or, well, school 44, you know, which feeder patterns they come from all over the district. So it's in a table form. So it really just takes somebody who knows how to do the, you know, the technical thing of a Google map from that table, which I'm sure that's not that big of a deal for some people.
Somebody
to do.
knows how to do it. It's
Yeah.
probably pushing a few buttons. But
Yeah, so that data does exist.
I think that sort of thing really, you know, graphics are a big plus
They
for,
are.
for getting people to realize the insanity of some of the things we're doing.
Right.
You can look at a table all you want, but it doesn't jump
I
out
think our
at you.
suspension data is really improving too. I mean, like the quality of the data and the statistics, the actual findings are pretty good this year. So
In
just
terms
in
of
terms
you-
of data.
in terms of timeliness?
Reducing suspensions, yeah.
But do you have the cause?
Hmm?
You can see the effect, but do you have a good idea of the causes? Was there changes?
Well,
made
we've
that
been,
affected?
I mean, it's been a huge effort that kind of like Liz was involved with
Oh,
the
yeah.
managed task force. I was involved with the
Yeah, trying to
whole
find
school
it.
climate shift task force, and it's ongoing work, community work, and implemented a lot of changes, restorative practices. I don't know what's going on at Leadership Academy. Are you seeing any changes in practice? Were you there the last few years?
I transferred there this year.
Just this year? Okay, so I don't know. I mean, I'm not in every school, but I know some schools are doing more like relationship building and communication and like bringing kids together. I don't know. So it is, we are seeing some impact. And help zones, like other alternative places where kids can go instead of just being ejected from class for a week. I'm totally off topic though. I'm
They
just
have
trying to
something
talk about
called,
data.
they have something called the line zone where you
Line
can,
zone.
well then you explain, because I know you know where I'm gonna.
It's like a help zone.
It's like an area where if you have an argument with a teacher or a student, you can be in this area. You don't have to go to the class right away, and you can talk and discuss the matter in a friendly way. And you'll get supported in that room, and it won't be something where, you know, everybody's just going after you. Can you explain a little bit better?
No, that's exactly what you said.
Okay, you.
So,
Anyway,
and it's actually happening. Is it actually happening?
Truth be told,
Not perfect.
it's not.
There's no such
It's
thing as
not
perfect.
perfect. No such thing as perfect. But yeah, it's about that.
Good. So that's what we call a help zone. And so like in different schools, it might take a different name and have a different flavor, but they budgeted the resources to have these in all the secondary schools.
it's supposed to happen quickly, where they don't try to make a big deal or make anybody
Exactly.
feel bad, but they
Exactly.
address the subject quick, they get it resolved, and they put you back into the classroom. And then everybody like lets go of the issue, right?
Say it is.
That's, you're okay, they're not gonna get
It's
you,
not like
okay?
you're out of the class until the next period.
Louder,
Pretty
Mike.
much.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not as exactly as much of like being a nuisance. It's more like you are taking away all the teachers' attention from teaching by being a nuisance. That's really what gets you sent there. I wouldn't say it's a con manner. It's more like one of those big, mostly what's the name of those guys? The big
Bouncer?
guy. No.
Century?
Yeah, Century more like just grabs you because you're being a problem and you will leave on your own accord and takes you. I don't know if it's a common manner. I've never been in there.
So that's how they get there?
Yeah, most of it.
Yeah. But it's better than like it escalating with the teacher and then like escalating into something that then results in a big dispute that then causes the person to be suspended for a week.
true, but I think there's like some things that could be done to make sure. Because like, we were at like a meeting or something, and I remember one of the teachers that was like, we like to talk to students. We ask the questions like, do you think you should be wearing that? Do you think you should be like this? I do not think that is a good way to talk to students, because that's basically, to a teenager, that's basically saying I'm insulting your intelligence because you don't know what's what. Honestly, I think the best way to approach a teenager is like everybody else. Just be polite, or at least treat them like a friend, being like, hey bud, I don't want to have to get you in trouble. Can we just do this so I don't have to do nothing to you?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, but that's harder to change from like putting dollars behind teacher attitude. It's hard. It's like slower, right? But it's very, very key.
Okay, one thing that we jumped over was the BAC meeting updates, but they didn't have a BAC meeting this
Right,
month.
missed one, that was canceled because there was nothing new.
Mm-hmm.
So the good news, bad news out of the previous BAC meeting was that more money had been given to School 16 out of the money that had been set aside that Cuomo did like a year ago, I think, for pre-K and for electronic infrastructure. And there was a certain amount that was designated for the district. Probably 70% of that, I should have brought the numbers with me, was given to School 16. So that's the good news, right? There's more money for that. However, then your plans change, so you have to get approval from the superintendent, from the mayor, from the school board, from the State Department of Ed, which adds time. So I think part of this was sort of treading water, waiting for those approvals to be done to go to the next phase. So
What's the chance of being in there by 2018
I
at
bet
this
a lot
point?
of money against that.
Money be back 18?
No. But I mean, but you gotta think of the buildings, if you had, right now, you said you've got the money to go, to engage the architects, to then engage the construction firm, you're talking about 918 in the best of cases for that, if you did it right today. And it's not gonna happen to them. So it will slip, and it's hard to make that time up. Now, Mike Schmidt said at the meeting we had at 44, that's his plan. And I sort of challenged him, is that the plan, is that a realistic plan? He just said that's the plan. So there may be things one could do to accelerate the program once you got it there, but those have to be put in place in my mind sort of now.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do the decision-making process to make it faster?
So it's half of me is hoping that it's 18, and the half that's trying to get 44 to stay open wouldn't mind seeing it slip a year, because
It
that
just has
gives
to
us
be
a
known
year
so
more.
people can plan what they're going to do for
Yeah.
a couple of years. Because there's been people from another school, I can't remember which one, going to Freddie Thomas and talking to people about, we're moving in here next year. It's like, well, we're not
22.
leaving.
22 is supposed to move into the Friday.
Oh, really? Whose space are we going to take?
Wait. 22? No, I'm sorry. 22 is moving to 6 eventually. Not immediately, eventually, like long term. And 25 is eventually long term. And I wouldn't think people from 25 would be there looking
I can't remember
at Freddie
which school it
Thomas's.
is.
25 is
25.
actually, they're happy in their building actually.
Say what's going to happen in 25.
That building is probably, at least on paper, and it probably is a strong candidate for retiring, like for not being a school.
Wow.
But, I asked for them all to be revisited, because with pre-K and eliminating all the portables and the need for better room for special education,
Wow.
maybe we shouldn't be closing more.
So we're using those buildings.
Nathaniel, that's the corner of Bay and Goodman.
Yeah, yeah.
School 22
It's a good school, very good
being
school.
moved again.
Hmm?
School 22 just moved to,
Franklin.
yeah.
Well, I
Are they gonna
don't
move
quote me on
again?
the school.
They don't want to be in they don't want to be in Franklin. See, this is part of why this resolution, why school communities have to have these discussions. No, I was begging for School 22 and School 36 to give feedback about what's happening to their school community, because they were slated to close. in 2012, when we were having the FMP discussions then, like at the time when 16 was booted out of post. And there was like no outcry, there was no engagement. And so then they actually closed their building and they actually moved them to Franklin. And now all of a sudden the school community is like, we don't want to be here. We're not happy here. Even though it was the plan in paper for years. So they raised the issue and it's been addressed by moving them to.
We got to move on to the last thing on the agenda. I reluctantly put it last, but the library needs to get a few words in since they've been good enough to let us in here.
Well, there's a lot going on this week with the kids being off. Tomorrow here at Arnett at 3, there's Kid Fit class, so anyone needing a little exercise out of the cold can come do that for 12 and under. And then on Friday at 2, they're having a kids cooking class for 7 to 12-year-olds. And let's see, over at Wheatley, on Friday this week, they're having a Kwanzaa Celebration at noon. And that's for all ages. And there's also a ton of stuff coming up in January. Let's see. Here at Arnett, they've got Martin Luther King Jr. celebration on Saturday, January 14th at noon. That's in conjunction with 19th Ward Association. And then on the Saturday, the 28th, they're having a cello duet with Ben Krug and Ingrid Bach from the RPO. So they'll be doing a lovely concert here. January 17th, which is a Tuesday at 4, they're doing a movie screening of July 64, also in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So lots of good stuff. Thank you.
Great, and thank you very much for having this place available for us and getting the projector up.
And every Saturday in January, except this coming one, there'll be spelling bee practice at 10. If anybody wants to come and help with that, let me know. I'll sign you up. It's fun.
Will the Rosses be here?
Probably. Yeah, I would say so.
Sarah has like a special love for Jay. So funny, it's cute.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for coming here. Is there anything that somebody had to bring up that we've missed? No? Okay, well, thank you very much.